You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our dinner and dialogue gathering on May 21st, 2025. Thanks for tuning in. So, over the past few weeks, we've been talking about the mystery of transformation. What it asks of us, what it offers us, and how it so often begins in the unlikeliest places. In embracing change and complexity, often in disorientation and dissent, and in change that we didn't choose for ourselves. And we've seen that transformation isn't about becoming someone else, but about becoming more deeply ourselves. We've seen that change can be a teacher, that loss can be a doorway, and that God is not far off during our unraveling, but actually pulsing at its creative center. And so tonight, it feels right to ask the question that's been quietly sort of like waiting underneath it all. So what exactly are we transforming into? Like, what's this transformation all about? Because the kind of transformation contemplatives are after always has a shape to it. It has a direction. And it's not a rigid goal, but a kind of inner horizon that pulls us forward. And the answer, I believe, is this. We are here to become love. That is the goal of a contemplative spirituality, especially a Christian one. Now, I know that can sound a little bit like a cliche, right? But don't let the phrase fool you. This isn't about some sentiment. This is actually about substance. The love that I'm speaking of isn't a mood or a gentle feeling we conjure when life is going well. The love I'm speaking of is beyond words. It's the heart of the universe. It stirs in the center of galaxies and whispers in the smallest acts of kindness. And it has always been there, whether we've awakened to it or not. So being able to say that we already are love isn't wishful thinking. That's a deep contemplative truth. Richard Rohr says it like this. We already are what we're seeking. We already are love, but we have to become it. And I think therein lies the paradox of the spiritual life. And I have to admit that I hardly even like the word spiritual because it can sometimes have a connotation of like otherworldly or inhuman rather than fully human. And what we're talking about here is being more fully human. And I can't find a better word for tending to the center of things at the soul level than spiritual, But I know you already get that. So what I mean to say is that we're not transforming into something foreign. We're not trying to earn or achieve or perform love. We are remembering it, becoming what's been true all along, so we can start seeing it in everyone else too. Because the more we become love, the more we recognize that love over there, in the stranger, in the enemy, in the family member we haven't yet forgiven, in the community we're not sure how to belong to. And it's this cycle that what comes alive in us allows us to recognize the same sacred spark in everyone and everywhere. And I've come to believe that when we're on this journey of becoming love, we are, in some sense, always being asked to break open. Not because we're falling or failing, perhaps, but because we are growing. Mainly because we are letting go of ego patterns. We're letting go of compulsions and of the illusion that we're separate from one another. And in their place, a space opens up. A space for the deeper self, the true self, to rise. And this self who doesn't cling or pretend or need to prove it's worthy, but the one that knows that it's love already. And so it can begin to act like it, So what does that look like in a body like yours and mine, in a world like ours? I wonder if sometimes it looks like small attention being given to little mundane things. Washing the dishes, like Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection, and remembering that the water is ancient. Letting your eyes meet someone else's, even in passing, and saying with your gaze alone, I see you. You belong. Sometimes it actually looks like holding boundaries, because love has clarity and it knows when to say yes and when to hold fast. It doesn't exhaust itself trying to be everything for everyone. It learns slowly that saying no to false peace is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Because you are not here to disappear, you are actually here to more fully embody it. Sometimes also love looks like resistance. Love isn't polite in the face of injustice. It doesn't just stand by when others are being dehumanized. It flips tables when tables need flipping. It rolls away stones when someone's been sealed in a tomb for too long. So becoming love will actually disturb the status quo, especially when the status quo is feeding on separateness. But, and this is a big but, it will disturb it beautifully. It disturbs it kind of like spring disturbs winter, insistently and with a new blossoming growth. But underneath all of these expressions, love actually has a posture, a way of being in the world that whispers over and over again, yes, and. It's not a passive or a naive yes, but a deep, wholehearted yes to the whole of life. Its joys and its griefs, its tenderness and its tragedy. Love says yes to the beauty that breaks our hearts and the heartbreak that opens us back up to beauty. It doesn't demand that life be tidy. It doesn't avoid suffering. It allows joy to arrive without apology and sorrow to stay without shame. So to become love is to stand at the center of all of that and say, even this belongs, even this season, even this loss, even this strange stretching joy I didn't expect. Even this is a part of what shapes me into someone who can hold the world with open hands. And I think all of this matters right now because in the America that we share, where algorithms are sort of curating outrage and dinner tables are fracturing along ballot lines, it's temptingly easy to shrink each other into labels, isn't it? Red versus blue, rural versus urban, documented versus undocumented, my people versus those people. Yet if the seed of divine love is buried in every human being, every label we create is provisional, every stereotype is underinformed, and every dismissal is likely a little premature. Becoming love means training our eyes to glimpse before anything else the ember of worth God has already breathed into another. And this love doesn't call us to hush hard truths or soften prophetic critiques. It doesn't mean pretending that some differences don't actually wound us, they do. It means contempt doesn't get to set the table. And it invites another non-dual vision in which we are able to see the wound, learn to name it and resist it and seek its healing. And to see the worth in the one who wounds or disagrees with us, to learn to honor it, call it forth, and refuse to let it be forgotten at the same time. That double vision stretches every creed, race, and political imagination. But it's precisely the cost that turns what perhaps was once only a belief in love into an incarnation of that love that becomes believable in public. There's a poem that I carry with me that I've shared at least a couple of times over the past few years here at Way Collective called Testament by Hayden Carruth. And Carruth was a poet whose life spanned sorrow and simplicity and hardship, but also devotion to his art. And in it, he writes of this image of an hourglass, which becomes a metaphor for how our lives sift away grain by grain. And he says that time is not just falling, but ego is falling too, as love quietly gathers in the bottom half of that hourglass. And then he says my favorite line, "Now I am almost entirely love." And you can feel the weight of it, right? Not some accomplishment, but as a sort of surrender to the falling. He's lived long enough, he's loved deeply enough to let the scaffolding of his selfhood slowly give way. What remains is not less of him, but more of what was most true of him all along. Now I am almost entirely love. This is what we are becoming. That is what transformation has been up to the whole time. Not perfection, not purity, but spacious, steady, embodied love. And so here, before we move to a close, I want to say clearly, this process of becoming love is transformation. It's not an entirely new path from the one that each of us have been on our whole lives, and our entire history with church or Christianity or wherever your journey has led you to now. Every part of your spiritual journey belongs and was a part of becoming love the whole time. There isn't 1 minute that you spent in a place you would no longer set foot into that wasn't a part of it. Does that make sense? Like some of us have spent decades, years in places we wouldn't go back to. But what this perspective says is that every moment along the way was a part of this path of transformation and becoming love. So we said at the outset tonight that transformation begins with surrender, and it continues through disorientation and often surprises us with a kind of peace that isn't static, but it kind of moves with us as we grow. And now my hope is that we can see that the movement isn't random. It's always been love drawing us forward, drawing us deeper, because we are each transforming into people who can hopefully love more widely, more wisely, and even more bravely. Hopefully we're transforming into people who can hold contradiction without shutting down. We need people who can feel their wounds without fear and choose tenderness anyways. We need people who can hear the loudness of a tumultuous world and still listen for the quiet voice underneath. To become love is to become supple, spacious, and attuned. And this becoming never ends because love itself is an infinite resource. So that actually means that transformation doesn't end either. It only ripens and swells with time. And as we've spoken about in some form or another since last fall's election cycle, to look at someone across the aisle politically or socially or spiritually and still choose to see their dignity, still choose to remain open to them, still choose to say, you are also part of God's great belonging, is at the very heart of what I mean when I say that we are becoming love. Love doesn't mean we agree. Love doesn't mean we don't name injustice, but love insists that no one is beyond our reach, and no one is outside of the circle of love. And maybe most beautifully of all, the image that I often think about is that we become love when we can look upon another, any other, especially someone whose story is so different from our own, and somehow still say, I see God in your face. Because if we're being honest, it's always there in the eyes, isn't it? Have you ever looked at someone's eyes long enough just to go, okay, I can't look anymore. It's too vast, right? Because when we see God there, we remember that we're not transforming in isolation. We're transforming together and mirroring divine love to one another until the whole world becomes a little more recognizable as itself a manifestation of that same love. Becoming love doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming resolute in grace, resolute in forgiveness, resolute in healing, resolute in kindness. And in every difficult relationship that we have, and we all have them, every strained connection, we're handed the chance to practice it again. Here you go. Do it again. Not perfectly and not all at once, right? We don't flip this switch overnight, but little by little until it becomes who we are. So my hope tonight is to affirm your belovedness, each of you, in such a way that I hope encourages us all to see that beautiful paradox that we are already what we're seeking. You are already loved by God, and now the great adventure is to become it, so perhaps the world can see itself more clearly in your eyes. And that in your own transformative becoming, you might begin to see that love has been looking back at you also all along. Amen. I'm excited to talk about this with you all tonight. Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @WayCollective. Peace and every good, y'all.